Music to my ears. Hello, everyone. I hope everybody is beginning to file in. Welcome. I know we're probably all on different time zones. You may be maybe lunch for you, maybe coffee break, and we appreciate everybody coming in. While we're waiting for some more folks to join, it would be great if we could have some audience participation. If you could drop a 1 in the chat, if you've ever had a doctor tell you your symptoms are just stress or just aging. And I open and I see there's lots of ones coming in. And another question, which, these are kind of leading questions. I'm just going to say that. How many of you feel that your autoimmune medication might be working differently depending on where you are in your hormone in your hormone cycle? Sorry. I'm raising my hand. Yeah, just aging. Well, let me oops. Want to see if there's any more people filing in. We'll give it just a moment or two. So thanks for your honesty in the chat. I actually want to start with something that might sound familiar to you. You've been living with an autoimmune condition for years. You know your body, you've learned your triggers, you've built your routines, you figured out how to function, you know how your medicine's supposed to work. And then somewhere along the way, it could be your mid-40s, it could be your early 40s, everything shifts. The flares get harder to predict. The fatigue is different. The brain fog is heavier. And then you go to your doctor and they look at your chart and say, well, there's many things that they can say. It could be you're entering perimenopause. That's probably what it is. Or I actually don't know what's going on. Maybe you should go see these 6 different specialists. You know that it's more than just menopause, but you don't have the words or the proof to explain why. And this is exactly the gap that we want to talk about today, and we want to close. So good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. My name is Tracey Welson-Rossman. I'm the founder of Journal My Health. We're a platform built to help women with autoimmune conditions and hormonal transitions track their symptoms and much more in terms of your environmental data, but with enough depth and consistency that we can start seeing some patterns. But not just to yourself, but also to all your healthcare providers. What we've learned from data is both validating and infuriating, and also from anecdotal stories from many women that we've spoken to. There's a real, very predictable biological connection between going into perimenopause, declining estrogen, and your autoimmune activity. But what's really interesting is that there's very little research data around it. And women at this intersection who have existing autoimmune conditions are among the most underserved patients in medicine, at least in our opinion. So we're hoping to get into this discussion and really provide a space to talk about this intersection. We hope to give you some practical and actionable information that you're going to be able to use. And at the end of this, I want to share something that we're building, and actually in the middle, we'll be talking about this, a research project that we would love some of you to be able to participate in. So I'm really lucky to be joined by an amazing panel of women, each with a different expertise. And I'd love to introduce them right now. So first, I have Jamie Nichols. She's a community lead um, working with the AIP BIPOC network. It's a space that has been doing the hard work of making sure the women most often dismissed by the medical system have a place to be heard, believed, and supported. Jamie, thanks for coming. And we have Cynthia Adinig, who's a research and analytics lead, amongst many other things. She's the founder of Synera and a research and analytical partner on Project Eve. She leads the work of turning symptom data into clinical grade insights, the kind that actually move the needle in the doctor's office. Thanks for joining us, Cynthia. And our very special guest, Dr. Jolene Brighten. She is a hormone expert, nutrition scientist, and founder of Dr. Brighten Essentials, board certified in, naturopathic endocrinology, a certified menopause specialist. And I can tell you that there's not many of those out there. A sex counselor. She's also the best-selling author of Beyond the Pill, Is This Normal? And the forthcoming ADHD in Women. She's dedicated to helping women optimize their hormone, brain, and sexual health through evidence-based education. And we love evidence-based education, and we love our data. So I want to start first by asking each of you a question, and then feel free to maybe add a little bit more about your areas of expertise. So in one or two sentences, as you tell us who you are, what's the moment you knew this intersection of autoimmune health and menopause wasn't really being taken seriously enough? Dr. Brighton, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, so I first made this observation, I would say in medical school, that we were seeing these patterns that women tended to have autoimmune disease that was spiking around hormonal transitions. For me personally, I went my whole life thinking everything was fine and normal because doctors told me that. 29 years later, I'm diagnosed with endometriosis. There's 29 years of menstruating, just to be clear about that. But for me, it was after the birth of my son that I developed Hashimoto's, what is known as postpartum thyroiditis, which is thought to be transient, affects roughly 1 in 12 women worldwide. Yet nobody was talking about it. And as I started to dig into that on my own, in my own journey, that's when I really started to understand how much shifting hormones affect both our immune system and our neurological system. And I actually proposed a new model in medicine within my book, ADHD in Women, which is the hormone, brain, immune triad, talking about why women, they not just experience ADHD, but experience all these cognitive changes that ride along autoimmune disease, and that always are intersecting with hormonal changes.
And Jamie, how about yourself?
Absolutely. At first, I was going to try to say some profound answer, but that really isn't what it is. Just a little bit about myself. I'm a certified AIP coach, and that's how I led to founding the AIP BIPOC network. Like Dr. Brighton, I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's in 2015 when I was 35 years old. 4 years later, I was diagnosed with narcolepsy type 2. And then also 4 years later, after that, in 2023, I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. So, but it wasn't until, what was it, 2024, when I had a partial hysterectomy, the best thing that I could have ever done for myself. A year had passed, and I started having all of these strange symptoms. And so, as someone who has been living with autoimmune disease, you are familiar with symptoms. I had somewhat gotten them under control. I knew my body. But when new things come up, there's a sense of paranoia, right? Could this be something else? Is this another symptom that I am getting? Is this another autoimmune disease? But they were looking like it was related to some hormonal changes. I was waking up in the middle of the night with sweats. When I used to be cold all the time, hot all the time, I was now cold all the time and set my thermostat to 80 degrees. It wasn't just brain fog. I was missing entire segments of time throughout the day. And when I started asking other people with autoimmune disease, because that does make a difference, because we are dealing with all of those other flare symptoms, no one knew. We were like, I don't know what it is. I'm still trying to figure it out. And part of what I do is based on community. Part of my mission and why I got into this work is to advocate and to remove barriers for others. And because the answers weren't readily out there, I knew it was a discussion that needed to be had, especially with the hot topic of menopause going on right now.
Amazing. And Cynthia. Cynthia and I met each other, it's almost 4 years ago. It's crazy. So, um, Cynthia, let's talk about you.
Yeah, so my story begins with COVID, becoming disabled from the first wave from COVID. Almost died of starvation and dehydration from developing severe mast cell activation syndrome from COVID and developed POTS and dysautonomia, which caused me to lose ability to walk and have nerve damage. And they sat me down in the hospital and they told me if I didn't figure out what was wrong with me, I was going to die. And so I started looking in women's groups about what was happening to me in this first wave. At this time, there was no word for long COVID. And I found a lot of women. And one of the things that we were talking about early on was our cycles being just so drastically different, leaving, coming back. And I'll never forget the EMT sat me aside one in the fall of 2020, and he was like, "I have a question." And this is in the ambulance. I was like, "I have a question. Don't take it wrong, but like, are you on your period right now?" And I was like, "Actually, yes, it's the first day." He's like, "I noticed that we take you to the ER around this time, and my wife has an autoimmune condition, so you should ask your daughter to your doctor to test you for autoimmune." And so I did that. It came back negative, but then that's when I started really poking around in that. And I was like, wow, there's got to be something to it. If a male ENT was able to see that there. And I had some tests come back as early on as perimenopausal, and then it changed, as time goes on in and out of that scope with all my tests, and my thyroids are coming back and forth, back and forth. I'm still ANA negative last time I checked, but I have all the symptoms of autoimmune conditions. Um, and so as time has continued, I continue to flare, like just a couple days ago, and be in the ER just a couple days ago, from my symptoms from long COVID. And I'm early in my journey. And so it's been great to have Dr. Brighton, Jamie, and Tracey, who are further along, because everything they're saying, especially with Dr. Brighton talking about her cracks in her lips that I experienced, that I thought was normal, have solutions for, and I don't have to suffer so much. So I'm really glad that even though I've been, severely disabled for the past now 6 years from long COVID, I'm not going at it alone, and I can get good information and figure out do I which autoimmune should I get tested for? Like, if it comes back negative, does that mean I don't have it, or there's other tests and that kind of thing? So I'm really excited to be here, my journey
Can
here.
I can I note something about Cynthia's story?
Go ahead.
So we've actually had research studies that have come out that have shown that women who were using HRT and exposed to COVID had better outcomes and didn't go on to develop long COVID. So I actually had long COVID as well. I got COVID in March of 2020. So same here. But it's very interesting when we look at the data, which is all retrospective, because at the time, they weren't even asking what's happening to women with COVID. And what we've come to understand is that women who were in menopause, postmenopausal, we can always define all these things, if they were on HRT, they had better outcomes when it came to COVID, less of the same symptoms that I experienced as you, the POTS, the dysautonomia, the electrical shock syndrome. Those are also symptoms that we can see in perimenopause. So there's definitely a crossover there.
Yeah.
Wow. I did not know that. I experienced electric shock syndrome, and that was devastating in the hospital. This is one of the scariest symptoms I've had, and I've had a lot. So, well, this just goes to show you how it's important that we all get together and talk, because
Yeah.
there's so much knowledge that we have to share with each other.
And not to feel left out. Usually moderators don't talk, but my aha moment. I was diagnosed with IBS in my early 20s, didn't know what an autoimmune disease was at that point. Um, One of the reasons Journal My Health came into being is because of my own health journey from a car crash. As I learned that those chronic pain, autoimmune do not go well. But my aha moment was when I was working with my neurologist and I was on Neurontin, gabapentin, um, and it didn't work very well before the start of my menstrual cycle. Um, and when I went to him to talk to him about that, he's like, that can't be possible. There's no, there's no studies around that. That hasn't been shown. I was like, well, maybe no one's talking about it. Anyway, enough about me. I think we're all here because we're running with these issues. So, Dr. Brighton, many women are told that maybe their new joint pain or their fatigue is just menopause. But how, this is really the crux, um, how can they distinguish between that hormonal symptom and an autoimmune flare?
Yes, this is such a great question. And the first thing I'll say is that menopause.
Oh Lord. Did she freeze?
Yeah.
Okay, I thought it was me. Okay, well, hopefully she will come back. While we're waiting for her, why don't we go to a question for Jamie?
Okay.
Um, Welcome to live recordings.
Mhm.
So Jamie, oh wait, nope, she's not coming back. All right. Jamie, if you could tell us, um, in the BIPOC community specifically, how does the misdiagnosis problem, she's going to come back, show up differently, and how much of it is root cause for not being a looked at problem?
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of goes back to what I was mentioning before. For all women or all autoimmune women, the pain point is really overlap. You have the fatigue, you have the brain fog, the sleep disruption. You also have pain and mood changes, and then there comes hot flashes and all the other types of flares that can just get folded into just perimenopause or menopause. And in that regard, a woman may know her baseline has changed, but she may not know what quote unquote hormones are or immune activity or inflammation and how they all interact. She may know them individually, but not how they all interact. And then specifically for BIPOC women, the overlap often comes with additional added layers. In some communities, menopause is just not talked about. It may be treated as private, embarrassing, emotional, sometimes spiritual, or just something that women are expected to endure. And then you have the added, I guess, barrier of language sometimes. The way symptoms are described at home when we're talking amongst ourselves may not match the clinical language used in the doctor's office.
Mhm.
So for others, and another additional barrier, insurance costs, transportation, long waits for specialists, which is one that I hear about a lot. I'm having symptoms in 2026, but I cannot get an appointment until 2027. And then also not having providers who are culturally competent and understand the patient's cultural context.
Mhm.
And then another layer to that is there is also a lot of medical mistrust. Many BIPOC women are not walking into a healthcare system with a blank slate. They're carrying personal, family, or community experiences of being dismissed or undertreated. So when a provider says to someone who fits that description, it's just menopause, the investigation can stop right there. The issue is not that BIPOC women like me don't know our bodies. Um, the issue oftentimes is that the system does not always know how to hear us. They don't know how to translate what we are saying, and they do not know how to connect the dots. So this is also why I do this heavily tracking matters. I've had a number of these webinars, and I always mention my medical binders with different dividers based on each specialist, where I track information not just with me personally day to day, but also my labs over time, my x-rays over time, my MRI reports over time. All that information is helpful. And so what that information does, it helps turn what women are living into patterns that are oftentimes harder to dismiss.
Um, Wait, hold on. Somebody asked a question in the questions part. I just want to make sure, yes, we are recording. This will be, uh, sent out. And if for some reason, uh, where Dr. Brighton is located and her Wi-Fi isn't working, we will figure out how to get her recorded because I was looking forward to hearing from her too.
Mm.
But sometimes we have to tap dance. So we appreciate your patience. Cynthia, when you're looking at real world symptoms data from women in perimenopause with an autoimmune condition, what signals do you see showing up in the data that even a root cause clinician like Dr. Brighton might not see without a longitudinal tracking?
Oh, that's a great question. I've been seeing, with the data, I've been seeing sleep and environment like weather, barometric pressure, heavy storms, heat and humidity. Those things are really, when you stack those on top of each other, wow. It's a recipe for ER for me, like so consistently. It's so consistent now that like I will text a friend that lives nearby and I'm like, it's been 2 days of a yellow air quality day, high humidity and high heat. Are you feeling like you're like near ER?
Mm.
And she'd be like, yep, I'm flaring horribly. Could barely walk today. It's like, yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And I noticed that, of course, like the closer we are to our cycle and like certain part of the phases, we overlap too. So yeah, that combination of sleep and weather and air quality. I feel like air quality is so underrated. Um, and it took me a while to figure it out because I'm okay on the one yellow day, or I'm okay on one red day. So it's not like, what is it? It's when you start stacking them and your body just gets to a threshold that it's all of your conditions are like, no, we can't, we need some sort of outside support. So um, I would say definitely those environmental impacts are huge. And if you don't track it, it feels like random. So having that long-term tracking that like Jamie's talking about is how you're able to spot those things. And even I was surprised to find like headaches, which I felt I only had a couple times a year. Once I started really looking at them, I was having them multiple times a month, and it was like coinciding with some of those other symptoms too. So it's tracking really helped.
And I just want to add to that, as someone who is battling, I don't want to say battling as like I'm in a fight, that is living with multiple autoimmune diseases and also with the narcolepsy. So I feel as though I have something that's impacting everything. The Hashimoto's with my thyroid and my hormones. The narcolepsy is neurological, a lot of fatigue. And I always say to people who have autoimmune fatigue, to me, it just seems it's a lot different than regular fatigue. And then I also have joint issues. So the important part for me in navigating autoimmune disease is mentally regaining some of my power. Cynthia mentioned the tracking. So with my rheumatoid arthritis, I check the barometric pressure. I check the weather. I know that sometimes now the latest change that I've had is that I don't just get cold. My bones, like I felt my bones were hurting. So if I can understand what's
Yep.
going on in my environment, I can plan better, right? It's not like I'm not going to have a flare. It's not like I'm not going to be in pain, but having these tools, being able to track what I'm doing on a daily basis, but also against data like my zip code, what's the pollution like? What's the weather like? For me, mentally, because we go through so much when we have autoimmune disease, that it impacts me sometimes more mentally than it does physically. Having the tools to take back a little bit more control over my life so I can plan better. I know if there's going to be a weather event, maybe not to schedule a lot around that time. I know that if, around my cycle, my narcolepsy medications do not work. And on top of that, if it's going to be raining that week, I just need to take the entire week off. So again, it's not, just about getting data. It's about how can I use the data that I have? How can I use the resources that I have to take back a little bit, if not more, control over my life, so that I can still live as optimally as possible in spite of the conditions that I have.
Dr. Brighton. Hopefully, I think she froze again.
Yeah, because that.
All right, we're gonna trudge along and well not trudge because that was great. And I think one of the things that uh I hope that her Dr. Brighton's Wi-Fi will come back because we the three of us are not doctors, so we are not going to discuss anything that is medically oriented. Um, I do want to talk about one thing a little bit off script, which has to do with compliance. I mean, we, I am sure that all the women who are on our call and who will be watching this on this webinar are busy. We talk about tracking, but compliance and doing this is important to um, however you're tracking, however you're how do we stay motivated to continue to keep that longitudinal data because that's what's going to tell you the patterns. Do you have any um, tips or tricks that keeps you motivated for tracking?
Is that me?
That
Is that
that's to either you or Cynthia.
um for me it's picking my heart.
Hmm.
Um the road to diagnosis was hard for me. I was just at a conference with the Autoimmune Association in a room full of other people with autoimmune disease. The mental toll that it can take on you, especially when you're first diagnosed and you don't know anything, and you think that you have to figure it out on your own, it can be an added burden, unnecessary burden on top of what you're dealing with day to day, just going through the disease. And so my mindset from the beginning has always been, if this is something that I'm going to have to live with, um, what can I do? And also, too, the age I was diagnosed was in my 30s.
Oh, Dr.
If I
Brighton.
have more years ahead of me than I do behind me, how do I want those years to be? And again, it's always been about regaining control back over my life. And when I ask anyone, or you hear most people who talk about autoimmune disease, you hear them talk about tracking symptoms.
Yep.
And so for me, again, it's just an added tool that benefits me more in the long run, that will eventually add to my quality of life. So taking the time out just to track a couple of things a day is not as burnensome as not having the answers down the road.
Great. I want to get back to Dr. Brighton.
I
Her
know.
internet is on. Yay. Okay. Dr. Brighton, we're just going to come back to, we did not answer any medical questions, just so you know. Um,
Well, good. I'm so sorry. Zoom
uh,
just kicked me out and was like, you're not allowed here anymore. I just had to restart to get back in.
I always say technology is great until it's not. So we're going to go back to many women are told that their new joint pain or fatigue is just menopause. How can they distinguish between that hormonal symptom and an autoimmune flare?
Right. So where I want to start is just explaining what menopause is. So perimenopause is the transitional period leading up to the loss of your period. So last menstrual period after 12 consecutive months, that one day is menopause, and the next day is postmenopause. Now that we understand that, none of these are just a trash can kind of diagnosis of like just throw it in there. You have new symptoms, and we just call that perimenopause. We just call that menopause. So the first thing I want everyone to understand is if you have new joint pain, crushing fatigue, you're having brain fog, inflammation that like seems like it's waxing and waning, you don't understand it, that's not something that we should just call menopause. So yes, our hormones can absolutely affect our symptoms, they can exacerbate symptoms, but we need to also work that up and understand what's going on. Now, when estrogen goes low, as we see postmenopausally, we can develop something called musculoskeletal syndrome of menopause. More muscle aches, more joint pain, more pain when we work out, harder time recovering. That is a real phenomenon. And as a clinician, I have a big question mark of Is that something all in it itself new, or is this perhaps early signs of autoimmune disease or a flare of autoimmune disease? So if you're someone, and I want to be really clear, like when we're talking about muscle aches, joint pains, that's very different from having joints that swell, that you can see the changes. They are different shape and size. If they're really red, really warm, that is something that is not just a menopause symptom. That is something that we have to investigate. If you wake up and you're stiff in the morning, but it takes hours before you start feeling better, you can move. That is also not normal. Some of us are stiff for the first 30 minutes waking up. Beyond an hour, though, that's too much. And then, of course, you're seeing other symptoms that go along with, these clusters. So if you're having rashes, especially like if you're having like a butterfly rash across your face, or maybe you're having patches of hives across your body, there's ulcerations in your mouth, if you're experiencing hair loss, if you have numbness, tingling in the extremities, we shouldn't consider that normal. And like I said before, electric shocks, burning mouth sensation, so feeling like your tongue is burnt, changes in how you perceive the taste of your food, changes in smell. These things can be signs of perimenopause, menopausal symptoms, but we shouldn't just accept it as that. The other thing I would say that we should never consider normal is unexplained weight changes, so weight loss or weight gain, swollen lymph nodes, or fatigue that feels disproportionate to the amount of sleep that you're getting and what's really going on in your life. So if you're having those kinds of symptoms, then we want to look into that deeper and we want to understand, okay, do we have an autoimmune condition taking place? Is the autoimmune condition getting worse? And we don't want to just say, this is just a hormone problem because, as we know, perimenopause symptoms and they carry into menopause, they're vast, they're extreme. We have every single system in our body rich with receptors for these hormones. So it can show up in any system of our body that we're having these hormone related signs and symptoms. However, when they start clustering together and there's a pattern there, and you say, I know my body, this is not normal. That's the time when we say, okay, it's time to investigate what's going on with the immune system.
So your doctor starts doing some testing, right? Before they send you to the 7 zillion specialists. Um, are there laboratory markers or what might be called clinical tells that may distinguish or show that overlap you that you would find as a doctor?
That's a great question. So, for everybody who's listening, there's no lab test that we say can make the diagnosis of perimenopause and menopause because it's been defined as a clinical diagnosis. So, what that means is that we need to look at your symptoms. And I think what's important to understand is a lot of doctors think menopause doesn't happen until your 50s, perimenopause doesn't happen until your late 40s. We know from recent research, if you have ADHD, you tend to enter perimenopause about a decade earlier. So we're talking age 35 with twice the symptom severity. Now, why this matters to this group that we're talking to is that women with ADHD have higher rates of autoimmune disease. And I think that's important to understand because we understand the genetic inheritance component of what we're all struggling with, our autoimmunity, that tends to ride along with other conditions. So, co occurring conditions like ADHD, endometriosis. If you have endometriosis, you can be upwards of 80% more likely to develop an autoimmune disease later. So, this is just important to know that if it's, a chance that you have ADHD, your symptoms may be coming on a lot sooner. So, don't let a doctor tell you, no, you're too young for this. So, that is, number one. Now, number two is that we can certainly do lab testing. So if you've had a hysterectomy, you don't have a uterus anymore, we can't go off of when was your last menstrual period, right? So we can test FSH, follicle stimulating hormone. If that's grossly elevated and we have to do multiple lab draws, and that's annoying, at the same time, I know as an autoimmune patient, I'm usually at the lab every other month, it feels like sometimes, but we do have to do consecutive draws to see that that FSH stays elevated. We can also measure anti-Müllerian hormone, AMH. That's historically used for IVF, but if that is very, very low, so we can sometimes see it like 0.1 your FSH is like 50, okay, that's a pretty good sign that we're in menopause or we're close to menopause. And then we have to couple that with all of your symptoms. Now, when it comes to the autoimmune piece, we want to be looking at things like a CBC. We want to see what your immune system is up to. You know, Cynthia mentioned she's not finding antibodies. Well, sometimes we have to measure immunoglobulins first. So there's a very good test called a Cyrix Array 5. Now, I'm not encouraging anyone to start there. I actually don't think that's a great starting place. I want to have good confirmation as to why I would run a test that is that expensive on a patient. We know that the average autoimmune woman, by the time she gets the diagnosis of one autoimmune condition, she typically has three others. The Cyrix Array 5 is trying to look at all autoantibodies in one panel. And depending on your insurance, it could be cheaper. But I'm not going to run that unless I run immunoglobulins, because if your immunoglobulins are low, I'm not going to pick up antibodies. And that you still can have the symptoms of autoimmune disease having the full experience of it, but I can't see the antibodies in the blood work because the blood work is imperfect. Now, the other thing I would want to look at, C-reactive protein and ferritin. Now, ferritin is the storage form of iron, and in women, we typically see iron deficiency anemia in anyone who has a condition that leads to heavy periods. So fibroids, endometriosis, adenomyosis, those are some of the common ones. But ferritin is also an acute phase reactive protein. If your ferritin is really high, let's say it's 300, and your doctor's like, great, you have great storage form of iron. No, you don't. You have signs of inflammation going on. So we want to be investigating like the inflammatory pattern. I also think it's important to always include a vitamin D because I have seen situations where someone's vitamin D deficient, they're having hormone symptoms, they're having autoimmune symptoms, we correct their vitamin D, and lo and behold, the immune system starts behaving a little bit better, sometimes a lot better. We also need to look at things like a hemoglobin A1C. So, what your blood sugar has been over the last 3 months. If we have blood sugar instability, that's going to exacerbate what is happening with any immune conditions, but also other hormonal conditions. And it can be a stressor for the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the HPA axis. And then, pretty routinely, urinalysis. So, if we suspect there's lupus or kidney involvement, we want to get a urinalysis. Now, these things are not controversial. Most doctors will order these things. Most doctors will also order, you know, depending on the symptoms, a TSH and TPO and thyroglobulin antibodies. So TPO, thyroglobulin antibodies, I'm sure this audience knows those are the markers for Hashimoto's. And, you know, we may even want to do Graves' antibodies. So we have to start looking at the symptoms and understanding, okay, what do we actually want to test? Now, I would also say a free T4 and a free T3 is also really important in that panel, that thyroid panel. And while I feel like a reverse T3 is helpful when I know someone's been struggling with chronic inflammation, chronic stress, so I can see, do they have the ability to actually make T3, but they're not. They're making a hibernation hormone that makes them want to sleep and gain weight and be a cranky bear in the winter, getting woken up. If your doctor doesn't know what to do with the reverse T3, it's not worth pushing for because it's just one more lab test you're going to pay for, sometimes a whole another vial of blood, and they don't know what to do with it. Now, the other thing I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with is doing an ANA panel. ANA is just, you know, it's not something we can always hang our hat on. Sometimes people have a positive ANA, we retest, we never see a positive ANA again. So whenever I order an ANA, I want a reflex. So I order an ANA with a reflex. And what that means is that if it's positive, I want additional testing. And I will also ask, like, I want to be specific that we're going to have a titer and we're going to have a pattern. That way I have quantitative numbers, but also they go looking for other things. So an ANA kind of points the finger when it's positive that like this could be rheumatoid arthritis or lupus, it could be Sjogren's. And so that's having the reflex there is really important because then they just take the blood that's there and they say, okay, this was positive. We saved the blood. Now let's test because we want to get that when the ANA was positive, what else can we discover in there? And just to note Sjogren's, if anyone's not familiar with Sjogren's, Sjogren's leads to dry mouth, dry eyes, dry mucous membranes. Do you know what else leads to dry mucous membranes? Low estrogen. So this is why women get burning mouth syndrome or they start getting gingivitis because their mouth is so dry. their eyes are really dry. A little clinical pearl that was taught to me by an ophthalmologist as well is anytime you have a patient with dry eyes, check for low testosterone. So this is also very important for the Sjogren's patients, for the menopausal patients, for anybody who's experiencing dry eyes. We want to check testosterone as well because that can be involved. But I think it's just important to understand that if you're someone who's like, I got vaginal estrogen, or maybe I got an estrogen patch and vaginal estrogen, and yet my eyes, my mouth, everything's still dry. That's Sjogren's until proven otherwise. And that means that they can't just put you in the bucket, as I've been saying, to just say, this is just menopause. They need to actually work that up. And so, there's lots of other antibody tests that we can certainly talk about, like fecal calprotectin, but it's all guided based on the symptoms. So, whatever the symptoms are, that's where we want to start looking for the autoimmunity. But we always want to look at, well, who tends to hang out together with women as well? So, for example, if I have a patient who's like, I have Hashimoto's, and every time I ate gluten, I had a stomach ache, and I've gone gluten free, I'm like, that's celiac until we know for certain it's not, because Hashimoto's, celiac, those we tend to see go together in women, and they're very commonly missed. And just for women listening as well, endometriosis, ADHD that I've mentioned, also very common to see celiac disease, and it is something that can develop in adulthood, and it is missed so often in medicine. And people have this idea that it's just a tummy ache, it's just tummy troubles. But if you
Yeah.
see someone low B12, low iron, low magnesium, we start seeing these nutrient deficiencies in the blood. We have to ask what is happening in the intestines.
Fascinating. All right. I'm just going to throw a question to our audience. There was a lot of information there. Um, how many of you have gone to the doctor, just your primary or even your GYN, and none of this has come up? None of these. I'm hoping that everyone's like, yeah, they all did that. But I'm just curious because what we've been hearing is not what you're explaining, Dr. Brighton. Um, um, so I just learned more in, I don't know, 5 minutes than, uh, yeah. So it's the menopause certified. I think that that is a bigger deal than we even realize. There's only 4,000 of you. Do you know that? Only 4,000 menopause certified providers. And
Yeah.
not all GYNs are menopause certified. And I haven't done a research yet on rheumatologists who are. So um, I'm just gonna, while we're on this, we've let's just talk about bioindividuality. I think this was a fascinating question. Why does one woman go through menopause with zero autoimmune changes, and someone else just goes through a much different experience?
Right. I think we have to view this through the lens of like the terrain, because menopause is not happening in a vacuum. We always talk about menopause and we just talk about the estrogen decline and we just talk about the hormone aspect. But women who are entering menopause, they are also experiencing gut microbial changes. They have a loss of gut integrity altogether. So we see diminished microbial diversity. We also understand, so progesterone, for example, is involved in helping keep the gut barrier intact. So it's not just estrogen, other hormones as well are influencing leaky gut. So the intestinal hyperpermeability is what we call it in the research. Women are also experiencing changes in their sleep. So some women, they sleep just fine in menopause. We know that disrupted sleep and stress are some of the biggest aggravators of the immune system and pushing autoimmunity. So some women are like, yeah, I'm financially stable. I have food security. My ACE score is 0, right? They started out in life like really solid. And, as they have progressed through life, like maybe they're not caretaking a child, they're not caretaking a parent. Whereas another woman, she may be experiencing food scarcity. We know within the United States right now, we're starting to see SNAP and WIC benefits are being cut. I think that's highly problematic. We're going to see an entire generation with nutrient deficiencies coming, but currently we might have a woman with nutrient deficiencies. You know, if you have food scarcity, just that alone is going to create tremendous stress in your life. Maybe they have a past history of trauma. Perhaps they are completely inundated daily with microaggressions happening. And you know, as much as people like to just be like, oh, those are minor things add up. And the body, you know, is constantly being hammered day in and day out. That's a chronic stressor. When we see a woman under chronic stress, we can sometimes see elevations in cortisol or depletion in cortisol, which is one of our most potent anti-inflammatory hormones in helping regulate inflammation and the immune system. And then we see DHEA sulfate in the blood will actually decline. DHEA is how the adrenal glands go on to make estrogen and progesterone for us, or excuse me, testosterone when we are postmenopausal. And so there's a lot of factors that can contribute to this. And so I think it's really important for women to understand that menopause is not going to cause the same outcome in everyone because the body is complex. As women, we are complex biological systems living in an environment which we are primed to react to in a myriad of ways, all with the goal of adaptation and survival. But when there is such an evolutionary mismatch between how the body is set up and what our modern environment is like, that can become just a huge stressor overall. Not just a stress, but an entire system stressor that is shifting hormones, causing gut dysfunction, causing brain fog, even causing blood-brain barrier permeability. So if you're like, I'm doing everything right, and why does she have it easy and I have it so hard? You know, one of the first places I usually go with the patient is, let's talk about your ACE scores. Let's talk about like what you've actually dealt with for the last 40 years of your life, because that's been influencing your system.
I'm going to take a question that came up, and I think this sort of rolls into it. Cynthia, earlier you started talking about barometric pressure, and we had a question about what you have seen. We were just talking about stressors. Can we talk about barometric pressure as another type of stressor that we may not think about?
Yeah,
And so,
so you know what really, oh, sorry, I
oh,
didn't know
well,
that was gonna be me.
why don't you take that and then Cynthia can take it as well.
Oh yeah, well, I'm just gonna say that we actually see that we always thought elderly people moved to the beach for retirement because you know, it's just like the life to have when you retire. But as it turns out, you know, being at sea level and even something with the ions that are happening in the sea level and the pressure changes that happen there compared to like the mountains is actually a lot easier on immune systems that are no longer able to regulate themselves the same way. But I'll let Cynthia finish filling that in. I'm so sorry. I thought you
Oh,
were
no,
directing
no
that at
worries.
me.
It actually works out because as you were talking, Dr. Brighten, I was like, oh my God, I'm seeing like what you were talking about with the layers. I was like, ah, this is so exactly like what I'm seeing, you know, with the stressors. And you know, one of the things that I've done with long COVID is I created like the first um I created like the first subtypes that have to that integrate socioeconomics, because if you don't have the money to get to those specialists, if you don't have the money to get out of a moldy house, if you don't have the money to get to a housing that, you know, has proper cooling, heating, then it doesn't matter if you know that you have these conditions or even diagnosed or even prescribed anything, you're still stuck in that circle. But yes, there's so many layers that impact you individually, and that's why I set out to do what I did with Scenario Institute and a research project, which was created. I think we're at like 2 billion modules, 2 billion modules that really go and isolate all the variables that we exist in. We don't exist in a petri dish. We exist in the real world. So one day it's hot, one day it's cold. You could wake up, especially if you're living somewhere like Ohio, and need a jacket and a coat in the morning and be hot you know, in the evening. And all those things are stressors on your body. We've got us working longer hours. We've got us doing way more emotional labor in relationships. I created something called the Man Keeping Index. You can find that on Scenario Institute, which really goes and itemizes all in the ways that heterosexual relationships impacts your chronic conditions and creates those extra stressors on top of environment, on top of barometric pressure, on top of temperature, on top of caretaking for your parents, all on top of the mental load and being a parent. All those factors matter on top of it. One, I will give a takeaway that I found that was the most interesting in our preliminary findings, which is there is a ratio between barometric pressure and temperature shift that very predictably creates flares for a spectrum of conditions from POTS to different immune conditions. And each condition has its own slightly different weight. And I've been able to mathematically sort that out so that we can figure it out on an individual level. Like, okay, we know you have a storm coming in North Carolina next week. We know from your symptom tracking that you usually flare around this percentage. We know you plan on traveling this time is going to increase your fatigue. How can we plan out your week so you don't flare, or at least flare a lot less? So you're not dragging your butt back from that vacation feeling more tired than you were and completely wiped out by day 2 or 3 from your travel days. Those were like the most the coolest things that we were able to do with patients. And so yeah, it's really individual. It's doable. It's feasible. No one had tried it before, but I was like, I'm so tired of being tired that I just gave it a shot.
So I'm just going to do, there's a question from Alicia. Alicia, before we get to that question, I'm just going to do a little plug for uh, our 30-day research project right now that is the beginning of the Eve research project. There's a reason why we called it Eve. We're launching this 30-day cohort on, I believe it's July 11th. We're starting small, 20 women. We're going to be surprise tracking information. These data sets don't exist. We want to get these data sets, but we're throwing some interesting things in to this. One, we're going to have a cohort of these where the 20 women, if they choose, can talk to each other, because we're finding that that interpersonal way to have a closed conversation with people who are going through the same thing may not exist in your circles. So we want to see if that actually has an impact. We also are taking that data and running it against a custom algorithm that Cynthia's put together so that we've got some actionable data. We want to see how that works. Your information is going to be de-identified. Cynthia dropped in the chat. We also are going to be sending out information of how you can sign up. You know, a lot of folks aren't going to be on this call, aren't going to know what to do, and we want to provide, not everyone's going to have access to somebody like Dr. Brighten. And just like a real quick fact, one doctors, when in training, only receive 1 hour of training on menopause. And there's a cycle that I heard that one of the reasons they don't receive more is because there's not enough research. So we have to be part of that research. And as we're all speaking up, and thanks to Dr. Brighten for writing these books and bringing this information to the public. But I'm going to go back to Alicia's
Hey,
questions.
Tracy,
Yes.
real quick, can you also mention the other benefits? Like we talked a lot about tracking, so it's not just a research for a project that we're doing to gain global research. You also get an individualized report, and I think
Yeah.
that's a good highlight for them to take to their doctor. So can either you or Cynthia
Yeah,
just talk a little
so
bit more about
as
that?
we talked about the reporting, this will be actionable. That you can have the data, but if there's no action around it, so that report will be pulling together glossary terms, ways to ask these questions to a doctor who may not be as knowledgeable as Dr. Brighton. And you know, we're just trying to make this better. We're also trying to work on a flare predictor with some of this data. It is de-identified, so it can't be tracked back. And I forgot the kicker. We are giving a little stipend as a thank you for your time. I just want to get back to questions since we're almost at the end. Alicia had asked if my question is where to go with HRT, would it put you in, would it put her in remission? I'm hoping you understand what that means, Dr. Brighton.
Well, I think she's asking, and she can definitely clarify for me, if going on HRT can help with putting her in remission. So I think what's important to understand about hormone therapy is it's one tool in the toolkit that we can utilize, but it will never be enough on its own to get you full quality of life. And so this is where we also have to be talking about what you have access to, lifestyle, nutrition wise, what is happening, in your relationships. I think it gets glazed over a lot how important relationships are in those who are trying to seek remission. We know that social isolation is now being compared to 15 cigarettes a day. Being socially isolated is the same damage to your health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And I think that, that's just one more layer we have to think about. Now, when it comes to hormone therapy, we have to be careful in the autoimmune patient. So, especially if you don't have a uterus, a lot of doctors will say, let's give you estrogen. You don't need progesterone. But here's the problem. A lot of women who are struggling with autoimmune disease are struggling with histamine issues. Estrogen is very good at causing the mast cells to degranulate and dump histamine. Now you have flu-like symptoms. That's like the same as most autoimmune symptoms, right? Like you feel sick, you feel awful, like you're have brain fog. Histamine's very good at keeping us alert. It's why, at least part of why my brain's working right now. It's a great thing until you have too much of it. And so we always want to be looking at that balance. I don't really care about the uterus in terms of like, should we or shouldn't we with progesterone? I think progesterone should be something given across the board because it is neuroprotective. It helps with neuroplasticity. It supports the myelin sheath of the brain, and it has the ability to be converted into allopregnanolone, which is a neurosteroid metabolite that can help chill the brain, help you get sleep. With the caveat that if you have PMDD, that may not be the case. I'm actually teaching that today. I know you put that up in the webinar. And for people who rewatch, I will also have a replay of a PMDD webinar today. If you go to drbrighton.com/PMDD, and I'll talk about this nuance because if you already know that the week or two before your period is the worst time of your life, then I know I've got to get your progesterone dialed in before I start you on estrogen so that I don't flare your autoimmune condition. But at the same time, I've got to get that progesterone just right so that I don't drop your estrogen that you're like, now I feel even worse. So it can help with putting you in remission. The other thing I would say is to pay attention to testosterone as well, because testosterone we know is a key player in immune system regulation within a woman's body. And so we want to be looking at those three key hormones. And as a little pearl for everyone, when our progesterone goes low, our testosterone or estrogen, our HPA axis tends to get more heightened because now we're more vulnerable. But it's also the same thing that when our progesterone is just right, we may feel really chill and calm, but we might go from like 0 to 60 in like a second when it comes to feeling like your HPA axis is overreacting. And the reason for that is because in that luteal phase, you might be pregnant. So we've got to be hyper vigilant. And so your hormones are trying to look out for you. But that means we have to tend to the stress piece even more because we know, I like to call the aspect of the immune system that gets upregulated with stress the seek and destroy. Like it is like Metallica playing in your immune system, and it is literally just wreaking havoc. And so one of the most powerful things you can do if you're like, I'm going to start HRT, I can only pick one other thing in my life, focus on that stress component, and you can two for one by getting rid of toxic people and surrounding yourself with community who makes you feel, I like to say, like glitter. When you walk away from them, you're like, I'm so sparkly and shiny, and I like just love every minute of that.
Dr. Brighton, I want to make sure we're being cognizant of your time. Um, do you have a minute to answer another question, or I can send it off to you
No,
and
for I just dipped out there for a bit. So
oh,
let's just act like that time never
your
happened
band.
and
Yeah,
I can
okay,
stay
great.
on.
How does this all factor into someone who already deals with mental health and has done the work to manage diagnosed bipolar 2 and general anxiety without meds anymore after being medicated for about 8 years after diagnosis, but off medications for around 3.5 years? Can this make one feel all over the place with all these symptoms and the journey of fighting to figure out what is going on? Can it make managing mental health difficult?
Yes. So being bipolar, you fall under the umbrella of neurodivergence. So I talk, even though the book is ADHD in women, it is about neurodivergence and women. And so falling under that umbrella, you're going to have an immune system that is more overreactive. You're going to have a neurological system that is more sensitive to hormonal changes. And so for you, it has to be very individualized. The other thing as well is that we know that as we change hormones, this can change bipolar medication, it can change your mood. And this is whenever I have someone who has this mental health diagnosis, I always say we have to partner with a mental health specialist because that's not my expertise. And they're going to clock changes that are happening in you much sooner than I am. And we have to be collaborating. I almost said conspiring, but we're not conspiring. We're collaborating to make sure that you have the best outcomes, but we're going to rely on you for your data for that. And that's something that's really important to understand that when I say data, I'm not talking about like 90 screenshots of like your wearable. I'm talking about your patterns. That is the most useful data that you start identifying your patterns of like on cycle day this, every single cycle, it's the same. This is exactly how I feel. Or we start you on hormone therapy and you're like, sometimes we do 6 days on, 1 day off with progesterone. With my neurodivergent women, I don't tend to do that because of the hormone sensitivity and the inability of GABA to actually, the GABA receptors to have the plasticity to respond. So, if you say, we're 6 days on, 1 day off, and that 1 day off, like all hell breaks loose, my brain doesn't work right, I can't sleep, I'm a mess, I'm raging out. That is important data that we should not ignore and we should incorporate. So, being neurodivergent, I liken it to we know from the research that if you're left-handed and you're operating in a right-handed world, you're under more chronic stress, and that can be associated with more chronic diseases. Being neurodivergent, operating in a neurotypical paradigm is bringing its own stressor. And I think your providers need to hold space for that and acknowledge that, like, you have additional challenges. It doesn't mean you can't overcome them, but we're not going to just pretend that those don't exist or that you should just suck it up and try harder.
So Cynthia's doing me a little favor of putting up a couple slides. I really want to thank the audience. Super, super great questions and conversations. Um, here's a little look at Dr. Brighton's book, and also let's hold this up for a couple minutes. So if anybody wants any more Dr. Brighton today, uh, it's 6 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. Eastern, um, for her workshop today. And then the next one will be uh, the Eve Research Project. Again, we're looking for 20. Oh, it won't be. Uh, it's just going to keep cycling through. Today's Equal Research Day. And then please join the Eve Research Project. Um, the link is at the bottom, or use a QR code. And because Cynthia is with us, you're going to get groovy graphics through the entire 30 days. Really, thank you, Dr. Brighton. Amazing conversation. Continue to learn so, so much. And, I would love to, maybe we can have another one of these in the fall, because there's just a lot of information that's out there. A lot of it is about the individual, but there are patterns within the groups, right? Just like Dr. Brighton was talking about. And being together, I think, allows us to have these conversations and learn more, to help our medical profession treat us better. So thank you very much. Thanks to Dr. Brighton, to Jamie, to Cynthia for joining us today. And feel free to reach out to us. You have you have my email, because I've been probably sending you a bunch of emails along the way to let you know that this is going on. And you will be getting emails from me with the replay, with a playbook that you can use for your doctor. And then we'll keep in touch. Thanks so much. Have a great
Thank
day.
you all.
Thanks. Oh, I guess we're done.